Welcome back, everybody, for another breakdown for American Horror Story NYC. And of course, I'm joined with Ryan. Welcome back.
Thank you, Greg. I couldn't leave you alone for these breakdowns. We had to wrap up the season together. We have two episodes, 9 and 10. They're called Requiem 1981-87, Part 1 and 2. And Greg, this was a very sad wrap-up to the season.
It is an emotional journey, everybody. Let's do this.
All right, Greg, let's first start with the title of these episodes, Requiem 1981-87. Obviously, a very significant time period during the AIDS epidemic in this country. And also with the characters that we've met throughout the season, right? We see kind of much of the story take place in the early 80s. And then we get a flash forward in these two episodes towards the late 80s when, the fight against HIV and AIDS becomes more mainstream. And the political climate and social climate kind of changes a little bit after the decade of the 80s. So, it's a time for mourning. It's a time of remembrance of those that were lost throughout this whole decade and everything that the country was kind of undergoing for a group of people in the United States. Like we said right off the top of this video, it's a very sad and dark and one of the most emotional wrap-ups to any season, I think, of American Horror Story.
We talked about earlier how the campiness, that's all gone, and this was a void of that for many good reasons. They didn't need it, and absolutely, I think this is an important story to tell. And the way they did it, which we joked about earlier in the season of how I wonder if they're really going to go through with the metaphors and all the allegories and how they're going to land. And they just said, no, we're not going to do anything else. We know our show. We still wrapped in elements of AHS. We still kept the bones, but we really wanted to tell an important story the only way it could be told. I don't know when I'll be able to go back to this. Just like Cult, it's a strong season. This season, just like Cult, are going to age with like wine, like fine wine. They're tough. It was a tough season, and I could see it coming, but I really feel like this was an important season to show this, especially with everything that's happening in the news still today. We're still it's a circle. Never-ending circle. The stigma, while it's getting better, and how I think we just talked about commercials. You brought up one to me, like Biktarvy. You keep seeing this Biktarvy. That's good. Like, we're getting this out there and making it, trying to remove the stigma that's still around, and we're still seeing it today. Look at what happened with monkeypox and how that started. I don't got monkeypox. That's only for the gays. So it's still around, and so this season felt so important, and it really felt like they needed to have it. I just never saw it coming from AHS. Halfway through, where everyone was like, I don't know about this, and then with Big Daddy, every week I kept thinking, no, it looks like they're gonna go with AIDS. This is completely on the HIV/AIDS crisis.
I think you make a really good point, Greg, about how AHS is dealing with a serious subject matter here, like in a serious manner on the show itself. Like you said, normally some seasons pass towards the end of the seasons, it gets a little wacky and zany, and they lean into the campiness of the horror tropes and themes that we see. But here,
run over the Antichrist,
right?
That kind of
exactly. How couldn't anyone forget that one? But here they deal with it in such a serious tone. It really is as delicately handled. And there's no fun to be made here, and it's really about mourning a group of people and how they were treated, and the people that kept on fighting to the end. You know what I mean? Like, as we see in the final episode of the season. So I think it's something fresh and new that we've seen from AHS, and 100% welcome it like you did. Now, Greg, let's talk about some top-level inspiration that we see throughout these two episodes. Of course, we see a little bit of A Christmas Carol in here, as well as Angels in America, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning play that was turned into a HBO miniseries, and dealt with some of the themes that we see here. A gay man seeing an angel and dealing with the politics of the time and the whole AIDS epidemic, and then as well as Pose.
Yeah, Pose was a huge. Again, it felt like a lot of Pose here, obviously, because it's the Ryan Murphy production as well. He didn't have I don't know how much of a big of a hand Murphy had in seasons 2 and 3, but overall, this felt like a little touch of that. I was a little disappointed. The only thing I'm disappointed here in this whole thing was just the lack of diversity, which is why I bring up Pose too, because how big that was in the gay community too, and black people, and dealing with the AIDS epidemic. So it was a little weird. They still, I don't know what kind of Ryan Murphy thing it was, but it still was centered around, at the end of the day, while we had Theo and a few characters show up, it was around, still gay white men. For a story like this, and when you're dealing with AIDS and the epidemic, and just I feel like they dropped the ball. With that said, I just saw so much of Angels in America in this, and from the beginning. And then we talked about how cruising is a big theme here, and there's still imagery to cruising in the finale with Sam. But overall, those little nods and homages are cool. But at the end of the day, the story itself and how they shot it with the Christmas Carol theme, I thought was really well done. How it segues from Sam to Patrick, and just leading us through these breadcrumbs of things that we saw earlier in the season, and coming back around to it. Very, very well done.
The shame, the lies, the violence. It's a cycle, Patrick.
Get the fuck up.
You didn't start it, but that didn't stop it from breaking you into pieces.
So, Greg, let's talk about Big Daddy here for a minute. We get a line from Henry, and I'm going to read it off to you guys right here. The darkness always wins. All we can ever do is transcend. A pretty fitting moment here as Sam is trying to escape and run from Big Daddy, but Big Daddy is relentless and always going to catch up, and you stand no chance against running from death.
It's still a little confusion of what exactly he was. Was he just the AIDS epidemic? Was he? I think it was more of a just a bigger. Again, somewhat of a Grim Reaper dealing with maybe just the AIDS community, but in whole, it feels a lot like Twin Peaks, and they have the same Garmin Broja, which is it's the epitome of all the pain and sorrow and destruction in the world from people that these group of individuals in the Red Room Bob, they consume, they eat it, they feed off of it, and that's a little bit what Big Daddy is how he's just the pain and sorrow out there, and just from the hate crimes, the AIDS epidemic, and everything in between, including Mr. Whiteley, the Mai Tai killer, and how all these are just, it's like a big shadow over the LGBTQ community. Now, that's the closest example, again, because of the Lynch connections here. That's the first thing that came to my mind. I just feel like that's kind of where they're going for, and it's just, again, like the ghost vibes here. Because of AHS in the past, we're always going to think of ghosts as like, okay, they're walking and talking amongst us, but this feels more like it was very contained from beginning to end this season. It doesn't really, it's not the same kind of ghost. We're not talking about like a Tate Langdon kind of thing here.
When they unmasked him, and it was like a blonde young model looking guy, and Sam kissed him and went to the afterlife. Were you surprised by the unmasking and what we saw there? Because in other times we do see him, Big Daddy, as a manifestation of a very violent killing. You know what I mean? We see a very violent side of it, and then we see
more like an angel here.
More like an angel, yeah, and more like a very gentle angel. So I thought it was fascinating how they chose to use those two different manifestations right there.
Yeah, everyone's trying to run from it until the end, when Henry tells them it's you can't. That's not what's going on here. In this episode, they straight up just say AIDS. In the first two, they got rid of all of the other context or the AHS world view of it. They just went straight up and said this is a story on AIDS now.
Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. Not normally, but in some of these stories, you might think that they would lean more into the conspiracy theories, but here they straight up later on in the episode, or I think it was the next episode, they cut it out and they debunk it immediately and say no, they pretty much say loud and clear, and they proclaim that yes, it's HIV/AIDS. And these 2 episodes were the first time that mentioned, right? Previously, we kind of all understood that it was what they were talking about, but now they come out and say it. Now, Greg, as we mentioned earlier, not only do we get Sam's Christmas Carol story, we also get Patrick, a parallel view of what he was going through. We get a flash forward to 1987. Patrick's very, very sick, and he's in the hospital. Seems like he'd been there for quite some time. And you get a very real and hard to view perspective of those in the gay community suffering from this disease and how they're ostracized and dealt with, even in the hospital, trying to get taken care of.
You're a doctor.
If you don't have any other questions, I will leave you two alone.
Oh, I have plenty of other questions. When is a cure coming? Why isn't it here yet? You should be ashamed of yourself.
AHS drama therapy, a lot. You're sitting through a long play right now for these 2 episodes, and again for the hard part too about this whole thing with Gino and Patrick. Patrick couldn't even see this whole thing. He was blinded. So until Barbara comes back we see her as the angel that walks him through his final moments. I thought that was great. I thought it was it leaves questions a little bit for Patrick, but not. I think that's just again for the story they're going with. They just said screw all that and all these questions about what Patrick. We were always thinking, is Patrick? What's he up to? Is Patrick Big Daddy? Is Patrick? So and then we have scenes like that where he's cutting up the body with Whiteley. We have the whole sequence where he's trying to help, which I think that's just to talk about his time with his setup with him and Sam and the body they literally buried, and I think that was just trying to go through that moment, and all the bodies in the past he's dealt with, including just being a cop in that time period. It's a lot.
Yeah, and then we get a kind of a beautiful end to wrap it all up when Patrick is finding his peace back at present day in the hospital. Gino's by his side as he's passing away. Very sad, touching moment, and he has a vision of Kathy singing "Calling You." This song was written by Bob Telson back in 1987, and the beautiful thing about this song in particular, Greg, you and I searched this on YouTube and did a quick little Google search. Patti LuPone, she's sang this a ton of times, Greg. I think you said the first she actually recorded it for a record back in the early 80s?
90s. I think it's 93. She put it on, at least I can see here, they got it on record in 93, and she has been performing that track for a very long time, and it is a pleasure to always have her singing, apparently, because everywhere I'm seeing it right now, just again telling y'all, just do a quick Google search on that and you're gonna see her everywhere. It's such that itself felt so much like AHS, and also felt like they could end the season here.
All right, Greg, let's move on to episode 10, and right now we're back in 1981. And this begins with a wrapping up of Hannah's story. Obviously, we left off Hannah not going to Fire Island with the guys in episode, I believe, end of 7 or 8. And we knew bad things were headed her way. Unfortunately, she passes away. And Adam has to deal with the truth that basically he transmitted HIV to Hannah because he was the father of her baby. So her life is cut way too short. But Adam uses this opportunity to learn more and everything he can about her research that she found, and then educate those around him in the community. And this is in parallel. Gino's doing his own sort of fight that he's putting on. The activism that he's doing, the protests and everything that he's doing, and both these figures are they're not going down without a fight in their own ways. They're trying to, as long as they are able to, they're going to fight to help others around them, and not give up too easily.
To treat people, have great results. 7 to 10 days, and then maybe you can take me seriously.
I couldn't get over that. It was radioactivity. The montage with Gino at the end. and it just goes through more Big Daddy scenarios too. So it's Gino walking through his life, trying to fight as long as he can, and he keeps dodging Big Daddy, slamming the door on him. But unfortunately, every time it seems like just death follows everywhere he goes, and not just for him. A lot of gay men in the community too have just, and especially in the 80s, death. Big Daddy was always there, and we see Big Daddy here throwing water on one of it, not water, excuse me, throwing blood on one of the on a gentleman in bed. We see another part where he's got like AK, I think he's got guns, he's firing into a crowd, and there's again, this is just pain and sorrow. All the destruction caused from the 80s is coming out here, and we're seeing just Gino walking through that. I thought that was incredible. It's also just, it's terrifying.
Yeah, Greg, it's extremely terrifying, and it was a very successful way to show just how lonely it must have been for someone.
Absolutely, yeah.
Someone who maybe survived a bit longer or had to deal with just that much loss in their lives, having to say goodbye to so many people, whether they were lovers, friends, a colleague, in any part of your life. And not only that, just to see that much death being wiped out of a community, it's got to be a very, very a lonely place to be. So that montage, while very, very terrifying to watch and horrifying, but it was very effective to get that point across over the time period that we see pass in this episode.
Can we talk about the cast here and Joe Mantello and from top to bottom, everyone brought their A game, knowing what the subject matter was and how they had to deal with it and connect with it, and also play these characters where it's AHS, so you have a little bit of the campiness, but that doesn't. They're telling you here, you got to tone that down. You need to understand the overall theme, the overall story we're going here, and they did a great job from beginning to end.
Why did you do this?
Gino. Let's talk about how the season wraps up. After that montage, we see that Gino has passed as well, and Adam is at his funeral and delivers a touching speech there at the funeral. I think it was a very a perfect way to end this entire season. And
Speechless.
Adam, you have to think that off camera later on, years later, I don't know how long it takes, but he eventually passes as well, but does not go down without a fight, as we've mentioned throughout this breakdown, that he is trying to educate those around him, conduct themselves safer, all that kind of stuff. We see him throughout the episode, throughout the season. So a very touching way to wrap up, and a very emotional way to say goodbye to Gino and all the characters that we lost throughout the season.
Okay, everybody. Now, this is not the end. Well, this season ended on a very, sad and sad note, but it does still seem like they're going to come back for more seasons, even if it is only 12. Maybe they're signed up for 13. Let's see if they still do it. Murphy has two families. He has his Netflix family, and he still has his Disney family, except, of course, Ryan, the Netflix family, it's doing very well right now. That's all I can say on that. But with that said, I hope they continue making this.
We are not going anywhere. We're going to put together some more fun American Horror Story videos for you following this season. So you'll have to stick here and stay involved with us on the channel here. And if you guys have any ideas of stuff that you want us to talk about, by all means, please hit us up in the comments. Greg and I love hearing from you guys, and any ideas you guys might have, we'd love to cover it on the channel.
Doesn't just have to be AHS. Even
true.
Though I hear you, and I will say this, I hear you all. We're going to do AHS True Crime Evan Peters. Don't worry. We're going to do that one. It's coming. It's a long video.
There's a ton of stuff, Greg. There's a ton of stuff that you and I can still cover on this show. Yeah. And if it's not AHS, hit us up with any other recommendations of shows to be watching or movies, and we'd love to dive into it. So we just want to thank you guys for following along and for watching us. I know there have been some some long breaks between the last times we saw you guys before this season, but we're here and we are happy to be putting video together for you guys. So thank you so much for following along this season. We love you guys.
We love you.
Bye.